Just one comment to add to the last presentation. We used to make a very clear distinction between the jihadi Salafi organizations like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and on the other hand, Iran and the Shia. We have to learn from the history that it's not so clear. And for instance, during the period that some of the speakers mentioned here, that Al-Qaeda was hosted in Sudan, for almost 6 years, there was a close coordination and cooperation in this triangle of Sudan, Iran, and Al-Qaeda. For instance, in Somalia, for instance, in the war in the Balkans, when Al-Qaeda members served in the 7th Mujahideen Brigade that Iran formed in Bosnia-Herzegovina to support the local Muslims against the Serbs. So we have to take in consideration that when we look at the Iranian Shia threat, it's necessary to look carefully. They don't hesitate to cooperate with Sunni organizations like here, like with the Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad or other groups. Anyway, this is the time for the questions, so I would like to invite the panelists that left us to return. And we have about a half an hour, so we will collect some questions, we will answer, and we will see how many questions we will be able to cover. Please. Yes.
Hi, my name is Jean-Patrick Gromberg. I'm a journalist from French origin, Israeli journalist. I have a question. I understood from the panel, first of all, I want to thank the panel. It was amazing. I understood from the panel that almost half of the countries in Africa are failed countries or failed government. And I understood that one of the signs of a failed government, the sign of the failed government is that they don't take good care of their population. I understood also that terrorist organization wants to create states over there. And my question is, what led to think that they would succeed in creating government, in creating state better than actual government? And if they would they take better care of their new population?
Okay, my name is Tolu Akarele. I'm a cybersecurity strategist for KPMG Nigeria. So I have some questions regarding the respect of European countries giving aid to African countries. So I know the UK has done a lot of things in Nigeria, whether it's training, the Air Force, military collaboration, thereforth, but also in diplomacy, they've been training regional governments, and I was wondering whether you thought that was done with respect or not. I had a question about the collaboration. You mentioned there's an intelligence arm of the army. I'm wondering, do they collaborate well with SSS, the Nigerian Intelligence Agency, and the Defense Agency? Because, as I'm aware, the collaboration is already a bit wavy between the intelligence agencies that already exist. So I'm wondering how the Nigerian agency fits in, the army one, and whether there's any strategy towards the herdsmen, because I think they can be viewed as terrorists. So I'm just wondering if the army has any strategy in tackling the Fulani herdsmen.
My name is Abraham Gertz. I'm a master's student in diplomacy and conflict studies here at the IDC. And looking at responses that have been employed to confront the jihadist threat, one thing that stands out to me that Mr. Rodriguez pointed out is that there's been a lack of cooperation or interaction or empowerment of local actors. I was just curious as to why that is.
My name is Benson Mandela. I'm a fraud examiner. I have a question. Years back, I went through a class here, and we were taught that for terrorism to be in place, there has to be motivation and there has to be operational capability. Now, I was expecting, or I expect the panel to bring up an issue that I think has barely been mentioned, and that has to do with corruption. Corruption does play a role in these two issues of motivation and operational capability. You cannot avoid to bring out the issue of corruption, because at the end of it all, no matter what you have, regardless of the strategies that you put in place, if that particular aspect is not targeted or is not combated, then Africa will continue having the problems that it's been having. So the Brookings Institute brought up this issue on the 22nd of August, and it was laid out. They mentioned some countries in Africa that are battling with it. I wish the panel would just maybe mention on this particular subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all the questions, which I think I can answer the guest for some of them, while my senior colleagues here will maybe reinforce or add value to whatever I'll be able to say. The first question is that most states, let's say countries as we refer to in Nigeria, most states in Africa are failed states, and that is why terrorists is doing well. I cannot agree with that. It is not a denier. But that would be too generalistic to say most states in Africa are failed states. Yes, maybe one or two, based on what is happening there, and some weak states. But many states in Africa are not failed states. And this generalization is part of what one of the panelists mentioned. We must give respect to Africans. We must respect African countries and assist them based on what they need and areas where they need assistance. If we generalize that the states that are failed, definitely all the solution we'll be providing is on how to address a failed state. So, having said that, the rider to that question is that it's because government don't take care of their citizens. Well, it was also mentioned there. Most of the type of democracies we run in Africa are not African type of democracies. They are foreign type of democracies that we imported hook, line, and sinker. Our traditional system don't support it. Even our elite system don't support it. So this gives rise, riding from colonial era, influence on traditional system, even introduce more corrupt system into what the traditional system of governance in Africa had been. And instead of having Africans taking care of themselves in their own way, the elite, the few elites that were brought up by the colonialists became black white men, implementing white-oriented policies and philosophies. That has continued in the psyche of the people up to tomorrow. And that is why there's that wide gap between the elites who are in government and also the governed. If I take Nigeria as an example, the gap between the elites and the population, the greater part of the population is very wide. Why? Because they are the ones that have access to so many sources of, so many areas of resources at the national level. And it doesn't cascade down enough up to the local levels where some of these things can be felt. But is there a way forward? Yes. The terrorists that we are thinking or that are thinking that they can provide a better governance. Let's look at the antecedent. How can Boko Haram provide a better governance in Nigeria? How? The same Boko Haram that kill, the same Boko Haram that carry 8-year, 9-year, 10-year-old girls, small girls, to lace with improvised explosive devices, personal born improvised explosive to bomb places. Are those people that are going to take the interests of the people at heart? People that lace human beings to go into center of population in the market, in the churches, in the mosques, to blow up congregations. Are these people the people that will provide a better alternative for the people? I think we'll be getting it wrong if we think that the jihadists, as they call themselves, will provide a better alternative to government. But we can be very sure it can be better. Part of the assistance that are required from developed world is how to mentor these people, not how to assist us to continue to create the wider gap between the elite and the poor. Most of the assistance tend towards that. I stand to be corrected. And that is why I bought the idea from one of the speakers that Africans need to be respected and assisted where they need the assistance, not where those who are offering the assistance feel this is where we should assist you. If I'm having stomach ache and you offer me drug that will take care of headache, you have not assisted me. You have only assisted, maybe you have more pain-relieving tablet in your kitty that you can spare. Then you give it to me to relieve headache. Meanwhile, I'm suffering from belly ache. That will not solve my problem. I think I will rest my case on that. From Akirele, it's also in terms of aids that are being given to Africa. To some extent, especially in the troubled areas, the aids are valuable because they provide, let's say, immediate succor. But what are the things that are tied to those aids? The organizations that are providing the aids, what is their interest? We cried out loud many times from the field about the nefarious activities of some of these international non-governmental organizations. Their rules and regulations were patterned over regular warfare. Impartiality, freedom of action, and all what you can talk of. But if you are taking care of Boko Haram the same way you are taking care of ordinary people that are the victims of Boko Haram, you are providing succor and comfort to Boko Haram elements. What is the guarantee that you are supporting the effort of the government to finish this problem? International organizations came into northeast of Nigeria when the place was already possible for people to come. When it was not possible, nobody came. When they eventually came, what happened? They came and created what I will call war-boosting economy. Let me cite a simple example. If I have a 3-bedroom house I want to give out for rent, and an international organization comes, that house I've been giving it out for 1,500,000 naira in a month or in a year. When an international organization comes, that same 3-bedroom house will go for 5 million naira. That's 3 or 4 times what it's supposed to be, and they will pay in advance for 10 years. What does that suggest? It means for the next 10 years, they are expected to remain there. I that have that house that you've paid their money, will I also not enjoy the money and pray that this thing does not end? That's the kind of local war economy I'm talking about. Those are examples that even the aids, how do we apply the aids? these are issues. Then collaboration with other security agencies. Well, for me, as somebody who was and is still practically there, I've always said it, there's no perfect situation. You can always improve. But if there was no collaboration, if there was no cooperation between the armed forces, that's the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force on one hand, as well as other security agencies, that's intelligence security agencies, defense intelligence agencies, national intelligence, and all what have you, I don't think we'll have been able to contain Boko Haram in Nigeria. As at January, between 2013 up to January 2015, there was no part of Nigeria Boko Haram was not operating. Even the UN building in Abuja was bombed. Police headquarters was bombed. Kano had no respite. Central Nigeria had no respite. Some part of Lagos was threatened all over Nigeria. But as of today, people in other parts of Nigeria and most part of Northeast can sleep with their eyes closed, except the epicenter where we are containing and still working very assiduously to see that we contain as well as reduce their effectiveness as much as possible. So if there is no collaboration, can the army do that alone? I spoke about intelligence during when I was presenting the Chief of Army Staff speech. It's not only intelligence within the Nigerian community of intelligence and security agencies. Even international community, we had Intelligence Fusion Center. America is there, France is there, United Kingdom is there, including contiguous states that form the multinational joint task force. Those are part of the local cooperation that we are working with. So at the beginning, Nigeria was going about it all alone. But along the line, if your neighbor's roof catch fire and you sit back watching, the house may not finish burning before it will catch your own. So all the contiguous countries had to come in. And that is why you had multinational joint task force in which Nigeria is the lead nation, made up of 5 countries: Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, Niger, and Benin Republic. Yes, Benin is not part of Lake Chad Basin Commission, but Benin is immediate neighbor to Nigeria. So it's on that basis of solidarity that Benin also became a member of Lake Chad Basin Commission. And they are doing a lot together. So collaboration is there, but in any system, you can't have perfection. There's always improvement. Then on the strategies to defeat terrorism, well, you can reduce the effectiveness of terrorists to the barest minimum. But terrorism is not like a chalk on the whiteboard. That job with a duster, you just wipe it off. No, it is not possible. But you can contain, you can degrade, you can defeat. That you defeat somebody does not mean you've taken life out of him. If I'm in a boxing tournament, I can be defeated and not necessarily being killed, isn't it? So this is issue. Sri Lanka finished with terrorism after 20-something or 30-something years. They finished with it almost 10 years ago. During Easter this year, what happened? 350 people killed at once, over 500 people wounded, just in one bank. This is terrorism. And that's why I alluded to it. The war is in it. I mean, the whole world is in it. In the Third World War, that we are just christening war in this part of the world, war. And I think the way is a global war that we really need to give a global situation. Mr. Nelson, motivation and capacity of the terrorism, then corruption. What motivates them? First of all, is their ideology. That is the primary motivation. Other motivation that give them supporters have been mentioned here. Lack of effective governance, education. If you are not educated, your mind is closed and can be opened just by any tap, because you don't have the capacity to interrogate anything. Anything that knocks your mind opens it and you just follow. But if you are educated, you have the capacity to interrogate any issue before either you are confused or you are convinced to take an action or to follow suit. So these are issues that borders on governance, borders on so many other issues of poverty and all what have you. So these are issues, those are the things that motivate support for them, but the primary motivation for terrorism is their doctrine. And they hide under the innocence of many people to confuse them that by the time you die, you are going to heaven. I don't know who has gone to die heaven and come back to explain that if you die like this, true, that's how it's going to be. In terms of corruption, it is everywhere. Corruption is everywhere, but like in my country, it is well known that the present government for the past 4.5 years that has been there has taken up the gauntlet headlong and is fighting corruption at that level. But everywhere, there's no place that is devoid of corruption. The level is what is different. So, thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. Thank you for that question, because the fact that you asked that question about failed states is important, because that may be an impression that we've created without wanting to create that. So it's good my neighbor corrected that. When I said there is a governance issue, I didn't say there are failed states. It's not the same thing. There is a governance friction, because there's a lot of governance in Africa, but there's different systems, and they interact, and they become a friction in itself. So there's a lot of governance, and there's different systems, and they don't necessarily go very well together. And as my neighbor said, there is an elite that is connected to Western education, to Western governments, to Western universities, and that has distanced itself from the general population, that has its own governance systems, where traditional governors and traditional systems are trying to align themselves because the elite has access to funds and resources, etc. So there's a lot of governance going on, but it doesn't necessarily lead to good governance. You see what I'm getting at? So it's not a failed state, it's not the same thing. Now, one of the pivotal issues in my mind, but my neighbor is going to correct me if I'm wrong, is that justice in all of this is important. And it comes back to your point about corruption. There is conflict resolution mechanisms in the traditional sense in Africa. People come together and solve issues under the tree, sous l'arbre de palabre. It exists everywhere. But it's less and less adequate in urban areas for the youth, where the youth has no more access to traditional conflict resolution mechanisms. And modern imported justice systems don't deliver justice. So for the urban youth in Lagos, Nairobi, you name it, there's no access to conflict resolution mechanisms at that level. Now, every single issue with your neighbor, you fight over a piece of land or ownership of something, can develop into a major issue, frustration, anger. And that leads to traction for violent organizations for whatever reason. I contest that ideology is an important driver. It is an important driver for the leadership, Boko Haram and others. But for the young boy somewhere in a community that has very few options, and somebody comes along and says, "Hey guy, I've got a reason to live and die for. I give you an AK-47, I'll give you some money, I'll give you access to fame, come and join me, I'll give you food. And we've got Sharia law, justice on the spot. And that becomes attractive. That is not necessarily ideological, but it's no other option. I've got very few options. I can wake up every morning and be a nobody for the rest of my life and sit there and rot away, or I become a somebody in a group that is violent, terrorist, bandits, whatever. So it's the dynamics are complex. I hope I answered that question. Your question is terrific about the UK. Now, try to imagine a plane full of Nigerians come to the UK for development cooperation. They're going to develop Britain after Brexit. They need it. Exactly. Well, it's weird, isn't it? The whole thought is weird. A plane full of Nigerians to come to develop Britain. Development assistance is hierarchical in nature. There is no such thing. It is I hope I don't insult anybody, it's a neo-colonial concept. There is no such thing as neutral, non-hierarchical, how do you say that? Thank you. Assistance, it doesn't exist. It is top-down by nature. It can't be neutral. One last point, maybe, if I may. Cooperation with communities. Of course, it's been tried. It's been tried all the time, but it's always small scale, by nature. You go into a community, you work with 10 people, or you work with 100 at most, and then there's how many millions? There's 50, 60 million people in that. No, 130 million people in Nigeria. How do you work? Okay, I'm sorry, I don't have my statistics right. You know, I'm old, you know. But it's small scale by nature. You cannot reach 100 million people at the community level at the high speed. It doesn't work. So it is tried and it does work, but always small scale, always at low speed. So
our time is running short. So any other speaker that would like to answer?
A very short reference to one of your questions regarding to Islamic State, or what does it mean? That's not a state in the sense that we're talking about nation states. It goes back to early Islam when they defined what state means. State means caliphate. Caliphate is the tension between, the constant tension between what they call in 7th century Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb. And it means that in the meantime, never mind whether it's in 7th century, 17th century, or 21st century, they're supposed to be Muslim community ruling the world, all of the world. Now, it goes back to the issue of interpretation. What does it mean, ruling the world? Dar al-Harb and Jihad and so on. Radical faction in Islam, most of the groups that we're talking about, not only in Africa, but in the Middle East and elsewhere, waiting for the day that Islam, headed by Khalifat Rasulullah, Caliphate, will rule the world. Now, the attempt to rule the world is common to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and also to Erdogan, each one in its own style, interpretation. Now, that's the idea of a state, Islamic State. So in the meantime, Islamic State is in Iraq and Syria. Later on, it will be, I don't know where. In the meantime, Gaza Hamas rules Gaza. Later on, now the question will be, if they will be successful, who will be the real Khalifat Rasulullah? Where's the controlling the world? The fight will start then, whether it's ISIS, It's Erdogan, it's a Shiite faction who also wants to be Khalifat Rasulullah. So that's the big deal. So they're using the term in order to be practical to this time and notion. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll try to be telegraphic. There's one thing that connects all of these questions. That is, things are bad and have to change. They have to change at the level of the government. They have to change at the level of the organization of the state. They have to change at the level of the leaders, but the leaders not only on the national level, and that is probably one of the biggest revolutions that can be done there. That is, trying to organize the state, empower not only local communities, but local levels, decentralize, creating regional powers inside of the states. Because normally inside of the states, there's a national power and there are no regional powers. And you have to change also the perspective of looking to things. Of course, there is corruption at all levels, of all levels. I remember a story that I was told by an ambassador when I went to an African country for the first time, and he said, there were a lot of kidnaps, and he said, let's hope that the kidnaps are done by professionals. Because if they are amateurs, the kidnap will be killed. And normally, who was connected to these kind of kidnaps? The local policemen that were paid to close their eyes, to forget what was going on, to see what happened. So, how is the way that you can go over this? Is creating new and better conditions for people to live. Of course, this is basic. If people can win some more money, they are not willing to be corrupted at all levels. But the problem is when you look to Africa and to all the news that we hear every day, and we hear them every day, we hear about corruption and not good things. We hear about the lack of justice and the lack of the system of justice, not only by traditional reasons, but because there's a lack of authority of the state also. Tell me, how many sentences do you heard until now of courts in African countries condemning somebody by corruption, for instance? Probably never. I never heard about it. You can hear about that at leaders that are deposed, that are killed, that are coup d'etat, but not at every level. So the problem is creating a new kind of authority of the state. But that is not something that you can get out of the books. You have to create by education, by formation, by qualification, by bringing new leaders. And there are great examples in Africa of countries without no kind of a revolution that changed and began to create new conditions because they had new medium-class leaders that were growing and trying and starting to demand to their leaders to become different. And this is probably a way to change. You have good examples, Nigeria, Kenya, even Angola now with the new power that went in with the new president. They are giving good examples that can be good examples seen by others to change things, because the new classes that are coming from the universities, from coming from out of from other countries that study outside, and when they come back, they demand more. They want their place inside. They are arguing for their own space over and above the traditional system. Of course, traditional system is part of the culture of a country. And it is important that you cannot not only deny it, but probably you can use it to empower all the social organization. And you have to do it probably from the top, because there has to be a leadership to do it. But they have to have a view of the country that would include everybody and not only a part of the country.
Okay, so it's time to close this panel. Thank you for all the outstanding presentations. And it's really impressive that you survived such a long panel, so probably you are hungry. And thank you all for being with us. Thank you.